Like the title of the video says, we are going to be covering Nezha's passive and his first ability, Firewalker. So, what is Nezha's passive? So, it's kind of an interesting one. It's not super complicated, but it is really good. So, Nezha's passive is basically he slides 60% faster, and when he slides, he goes 35% farther. This is a really good passive in my opinion. It's kind of what personifies a passive. It's unique, it's different, and it's not overpowered, and it doesn't demand a certain playstyle, but it encourages a little bit of a certain playstyle, whereas you slide instead of like maybe bullet jumping 99% of the time or sprinting on certain frames. So I think the passive is a really, really healthy balance of power and kind of style. That being said, there are some mechanics that we'll talk about here, and that is the fact that the passive doesn't actually stack with ability modifier mods. So this thing does not work with things like ability strength or ability range, duration, things of that nature. So you can't multiply that 60%. However, you can additively modify it with other slide mods. So whereas you get 60% faster, 35% further, if you have friction mods or slide mods like maglev or cunning drift and things like that, it will stack with the passive additively. So it does make it really, really good to stack with other slide mods. So keep in mind whenever you build Nezha, you might want to try to find a spot to slip in something like that just for that extra level of mobility. However, it isn't necessary just because he already is so mobile with his other skills that he has. So I think that's going to cover it for the passive, other than the fact that he does in fact have an augment called controlled slide, I think it's called. I don't think you should ever use it. Basically it disables his passive so that you get a small buff to, I think it's ability strength. This is worse. It's the worst of its kind. So while some of the other frames like Zephyr, for instance, we just covered her, she does have the ability to kind of disable her passive for a small bonus to ability strength. Even then it's not really worth it. But on Nezha, where his passive is actually really good, it's kind of ridiculous that it even exists. So if you guys want to have it as a collector's item, no problem, but I wouldn't ever put it on my Nezha. So we have that out of the way. The passive is done. On to the main ability, Firewalker. So Firewalker, first and foremost, is a helmet ability, so it's going to get kind of treated a little bit differently. So the fact that it is a helmet ability means that we're going to be, I guess, evaluating it maybe a little bit more stringently, but also a little bit more flexibly, because this can kind of go on anybody now, right? So let's talk about Firewalker. So first, let's just read what it says it does. Blaze a trail of flame, scorching enemies and cleansing allies. Teleporting blasts the landing area with a ring of fire. This teleportation, as we're going to see below, there's an explosion radius and explosion damage. Neither of those we're going to be talking about. Those are both part of the synergy with Blazing Chakram. We aren't going to be covering that until we cover Blazing Chakram in the next Nezha video. So look out for that there, but for now we're going to be pretending those lines don't exist. This is a 25 drain skill. This is very, very standard for a first ability. It's pretty cheap. It has a 30-second duration. This is a very respectable duration. It's not insanely long, but it is by no means short. Now we get to the first bit of kind of I guess complexity, and that is that we also have an effect duration. So what are the differences between the main duration and the effect duration? So from here forward in the video, I'm going to be calling the duration the buff duration, and then we have the effect duration, or the trail duration. So the buff duration is the amount of time that will actually have the quote-unquote Firewalker buff. The effect duration is the amount of time that any of these flame trails that we leave when we run by, it is the duration of time that they last on the ground. So what does the buff duration do if it doesn't just drop fire? Well, it actually does two things. The buff duration drops fire, and it gives you an increase of speed. The trail that is on the ground that lasts 10 seconds by default does a number of other things. So what it will do is it will actually deal damage to enemies, This damage has a very high heat status chance, so it gets everything that comes along with that, including armor stripping and CC, and a little bit of damage over time. And it also cleanses allies. So basically any enemy statuses that affect an ally, if an ally runs over your fire trail, it'll actually cleanse them of that. Now, this can seem like kind of like a pseudo immunity to statuses, but it is not an immunity. It's just a very quick, very easy to control status cleanse, put it that way. Now let's talk a little bit more about the speed increase. Now the speed increase is 25%. This buff is very, very handy, but it doesn't actually get scaled by ability strength or duration or anything like that. The 25% speed increase is always going to be 25% no matter what you do. So that being said, the 25% is a movement speed increase. What does that mean? Well, that means it's going to affect your aiming down sight speed, it's going to affect your jogging speed, and it's going to affect your sprinting speed. So what does that look like? So let's go ahead and do that. So this is our standard aim down sight speed. For whatever reason, when you're aim down sights and you cast it, you're going to pop up in the air. But as you can see, we're aiming down sight and we're moving a little bit quicker, and then we get our jog speeds a little bit faster, and then our sprint speeds, quite a bit faster. So this is a really, really good skill for just movement in general. It affects every type of movement that you do, not just sprint speed. So that alone is actually a really big boon to using this skill in general. In addition to that, you do leave fire trails on the ground. Let's talk about fire trails. So these fire trails will actually deal damage to enemies, and they will also cleanse allies of statuses if they run through them. Keep in mind, these fire trails are very, very low to the ground. If an enemy is flying, even if they dive bomb you, they're seldomly ever going to touch one of these fire trails. In addition to that, whenever you fall through the ground or fall through the air, you're not going to actually generate a fire trail. However, whenever you bullet jump, you will generate a fire trail. So as you can see, I had one going up when I bullet jumped, but if I fall down after the it ran out. If I fall down after a bullet jump, you'll see that at some point during the arc, it actually stops generating. So right there is where my quote-unquote bullet jump ended. So you will be able to create fire trails through bullet jumping through areas. Other than that, let's go ahead and take a look at how the status pseudo immunity works. So let's go ahead and pull in an enemy, and I'm going to have him apply a dot to me, hopefully. What are you doing in the ground there, buddy? Why did he... What happened? Let me try to respawn him. Sorry about this, guys. I don't know why he did that. Why is he... Is it because I have a hotfix? They're just like trying to force... Oh, I think it's because I have my AI pause. Here I am trying to blame them, and it's probably me. Yep, that's what I get. That's what I get. Alright, so this guy is going to drop his little buddy, and then he's going to dash through me and give me a poison dot. Now, I'm going to kill him, but as you can see, we clearly have a poison dot. When I cast Firewalker, it gets cleansed. Now, that being said, if I'm standing still, even when I'm in my fire, hopefully he can do it for me, and he dashes and he gives me a cloud, I can still get a status effect on me. So let's give him a couple more tries to show that. Come on. There we go. So as you can see, I clearly have one, even though I have the buff. If I start moving, I actually quote-unquote walk through my fire, and that cleanses me. So just keep in mind, this isn't status immunity. It is simply a status cleanse. Now, we've kind of talked about what strength does, and we've kind of talked about what all the stats kind of, how they interact and everything like that. We've also talked about how the general mechanics of the skill work with bullet jumping and how the trails interact with statuses and all that kind of stuff. Let's actually look at the damage component now. So the damage component isn't super amazing, and what we're going to do is I'm going to bring in our good old corrupted heavy gunner, and I'm going to put him at, let's say, level 60. Let's just we're not going to go for broke here. We're just going to put him at level 60 and see he's shooting me. Now when he's going to knock me down, of course. So I'm going to basically run circles around him with fire. And you can see this is a very effective CC, albeit it isn't an AoE per se. You can kind of run near enemies and you'll be able to constantly proc them with this heat. You're also going to notice that he's gotten 25 stacks of heat there. That's not inconsequential. Now, that being said, after all this time, I haven't done that much damage. Like, if we're being honest, this is not good damage, right? It does strip armor because it is a heat status effect, and it will deal damage, but it isn't ever going to stack up to something super meaningful, especially if we start talking about enemies in, like, you know, the hundreds. Like, this isn't going to do anything. Even if I have him hold completely still, this isn't going to do anything, even if I, you know, circle him with fire. So just keep in mind the damage component of this thing is not going to be like crazy. However, there is an augment. So let's go ahead and talk about the augment. This thing is called Pyroclastic Flow. Let me go ahead and grab it. I believe it's on this config. Yep. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to spawn a bunch of heavy gunners because this will let me stack it a little bit easier. But I do want to show one more mechanic before I start stacking it on all of them. So please keep in mind, watch how much damage is being dealt to the heavy gunner, and watch how much damage is being recorded by the mod. So here we go. You see I have been dealing 7, 8, 8, 8, 8. Look at our stack. We're up to 2,000 damage. It actually records the damage as if it was true damage, right? So this damage recorded is not going to be for like 7, 8, 15, 21, you know, that kind of thing. It's going to be whatever it quote unquote should have dealt before armor and before resistances. So that actually is a really big checkbox in terms of this thing being, you know, useful. However, you can see we only, you know, recorded about 3,000 damage. So whenever you reactivate the ability, you will kick it out. Now, as you can see here, I actually don't have the ability active currently. So when I kick this out, you're actually going to notice that it does turn on my firewalking again. So you can see here we're doing 128. You'll also notice that the Pyroclastic Flow, the trail, doesn't actually proc heat. If it did proc heat, it would be really good in my opinion, because those heat statuses could stack up really big. But let's go ahead and this is actually another interesting thing. If you activate Firewalker with the augment on, if you tap it again, it'll just turn it off if you haven't recorded any damage. And then you can cast it again. Normally it just recasts the ability. So let's go ahead and try to stack up a bunch of damage as much as we can. Now keep in mind, I am not modded currently. So this isn't with duration or strength or anything like that. But you can see very clearly up there that we've already recorded, you know, 20k, 30k damage. But you're going to see that this isn't exactly insane. So I'm going to go ahead and kick it out before they lose all their heat procs. And you're going to see they're getting hit for 3,300. So this isn't exactly insane. Could this kill some people that have, you know, corrosive projections on them, some heat procs on them, some viral procs on them? Absolutely it could, right? Even really high stuff. The problem is this augment is kind of like a simulacrum hero. There's a lot of stuff in the game like that where it's going to be really good when enemies are standing still and when they're grouped up a bunch and when you can control the environment. But the second you let these guys start wandering around, it's going to be really hard to stack up any sort of meaningful damage against them to release in your Pyroclastic Flow. Now that is actually going to cover it for the general usage of the stats and the general usage of the augment. The final note that I will have on the actual skill itself is the fact that nullifiers will actually remove your Pyroclastic flow fire and the fire on the ground from your fire trail. So just keep in mind, even if a nullifier doesn't touch you, it can still remove all of your fire. So just keep an eye out for that. It's not a super big deal, but it is something to, think about. Now, the final thing we're going to talk about is how Firewalker can be used as a helmet ability. So there isn't going to be anything like super crazy, like, wow, when you use it with this, it's going to explode and, you're going to see stars and you'll finally get a girlfriend, and, it's not what it is, right? What this thing does do, though, is it does a lot of really solid things without really having any sort of opportunity cost. So let's go over a list of what this thing does. It gives you a movement speed bonus that it applies to sprinting, walking, aiming down sights. It gives you the ability to proc heat on enemies, deal a small amount of damage over time, but it's also exceptionally good at melee. Just because you're going to be in people's faces. It's basically a free heat proc if you're doing some sort of conditioned overload build. So there are some applications to stripping armor or melee, or just outright dealing damage with your augment if it's against lower level enemies. And it is a status cleanse. And I think this last point is actually probably the biggest reason why I think this is a great candidate for a helmet ability. This thing does not break your energy bank. It is very, very important when you're talking about helmet abilities to understand that yes, roar is good, but roar does not belong on all frames. Why is that? Well, certain frames just cannot handle that amount of energy draw. Some frames are already caster heavy, and casting another 75 energy ability on top of everything they're already casting, they're gonna go out of energy very quickly and they're not gonna be able to maintain. Firewalker can go on literally any frame and not affect their energy balance at all. In fact, it can even improve it in some situations. I also think it's very, very good for certain playstyles. Anything where you're speed farming or just running to kill bosses, things of that nature. Firewalker is actually really good to just get where you're going. So all in all, I think Firewalker is a great skill. I think as a helmet ability, it's very strong. It's not the strongest. It's not going to change your play style. It's not going to overpower you. But if you're looking for something that just kind of does a little bit of everything and makes you feel better, just better across the board, no fuss, no muss, you don't have to build around it, you just want to cast an ability and move on, this might be the ability for you. But if I have missed anything or misrepresented anything, guys, like always, let me know in the comment section below, and thanks for watching.